blue team engagement and in your daily life as a cybersecurity practitioner, because some of the skills that it builds. Who am I? I'm a cybersecurity practice lead for Appalachian Technologies, which I do a lot of different things. I do a lot of red teaming, penetration testing, blue teaming, been on both sides of the fence. Adjunct professor for Harrisburg University and University of Phoenix. Takes up a lot of my extra free time because I love teaching. I think it's a big thing in this industry to help be peers and mentors to each other to help increase the level of understanding and education in our environment. I do have a master's degree that cost me way too much money, but too late now. So moving along, and I've been a long time chess teacher and player. I played chess in high school. It's been a passion of mine for a long time. So it's going to be fun. We're going to bridge the gap between these two worlds. So what is... Yes, absolutely. That's true. I did found BSIDES Harrisburg, and it is a fun event. If you didn't get to it this year, come to it next year. It's going to be at the end of August next year, and more information will be incoming about that. So I'd love to see everyone who's here there too, and vice versa. So what is chess? This is an ancient board game, one of the first strategy board games. It's over 1,500 years old, and they can't really pin the exact date on it. The thing that's interesting about chess is, unlike a lot of things, especially in cybersecurity, the rules of chess don't really change, like at all. The last rule change was, somewhere in the 1900s, and for the most part, there's small rule changes for tournament games. But the basic rules of the game have not changed in a very long time, so it's very stable. So if you read a book about chess from the 1900s, it would still be very applicable today. How many people can say, they have a cybersecurity book that's 90 years old that's still viable, right? Very few, right? So how many people here have ever played chess before? Show of hands. Awesome. So most people here. So here's a quick reminder of some of the ways the different pieces move. We have the pawn, which is the lowest level piece. That's our foot soldiers, but they can promote to any potential piece that you want once they get to the other end of the board. And in most circumstances, you'll promote to a queen. You have your knight and your bishop. Your knight moves in an L shape. Your bishop moves diagonally. Your rook can move horizontally or vertically. And your queen she's the all-powerful person. She's the one really running the show, right? And she's just really powerful in moving anywhere diagonally or horizontally or vertically. And then the king, if you lose the king, you lose the game, but he can move one square in any direction. So, how many people are familiar with the point system or have ever used a point system in chess? Probably not a lot of people, but when you start getting into competitive chess, you have to figure out a way to know how you're doing in the game. Even though the game's objective is to get checkmate, you have to kind of know how you're doing while you're playing the game. There's a numerical system that's often used in chess tournaments and by players to figure out how you're doing. And it all starts with points or one pawn. Every pawn is worth 1 point. A bishop and a knight are worth about 3. A rook is 5, and a queen is 9. The king doesn't have a specific point. You can't sacrifice the king. That doesn't work in this game. But if we were to give it a power level, so to speak, we would probably give it a 3 because of his ability to move in any direction at least one space. Now, another thing to consider is certain players will rate certain things a little bit more powerful in rating than others. It's generally advised if you have both your bishops, they consider that almost like half a point an advantage because you can cover more squares with 2 bishops and rather than 2 knights. The situation of the game may change, but this is a good idea as you're playing to know whether you're doing well in the game or if you're down by a lot. And it's going to take a lot of strategy in order to try and come back from a loss. So some basic opening principles of the game of chess. One of the things you want to do is control the center. A good example of this, if we look at a knight, There's this old expression called a knight on the rim is grim. That's often used by chess players. And the reason that is a knight that is near the center of the board can move 8 squares. As he gets to the very edge of the board, if he's in any of the corners, he can only move 2. And in general, that's practice for every single chess piece you have. The more central control you have, or the closer they are to the center, the more options and possibilities you have. During World War II, there was this concept known as no man's land, right? If you went out into no man's land, you would get shot. No one controlled the center of the battlefield. When you're talking about strategy and tactics, one of the things is you want control of the center of the battlefield. If you have control of it, you're going to have an advantage against your opponent, versus if you don't. So central control in the game is very important. Two other basic opening strategies. You don't want to move your queen out too early. A lot of people tend to do that. You don't want to move the same piece twice. And the reason you don't want to move the same piece twice is this thing that we call tempo in chess. And tempo is basically the advantage. When one player makes a move, another player has to react. And we'll talk about that more because this happens a lot in cybersecurity when a red teamer makes a move and a blue team has to react. We'll talk about the parallels a little bit. But we'll see that a lot. So you don't want to move the same piece twice because you're losing time and potentially losing an advantage you could have. The other thing you want to do is castle early. You want to defend your king or your valuables just like in an organization. You want to defend the data that's important to an organization the same way. So Chess Tactics 101. We're going to talk about the skewer. So the first one we're going to talk about is the skewer, which is attacking a powerful piece to obtain another piece. So we're attacking a piece through a different piece. So for example, here in our diagram, we're moving the bishop to c4, and we're attacking the queen. The queen can move, but in the direction of the queen, the rook is placed on g8. Now, if we do the math on that, if we were to lose a rook, and the queen then takes the bishop, we lost 2 points. So the advantage then goes to white. So by using skewers, you can pick up additional points and attack through different obstacles. When we're talking about cybersecurity, often we have to look at things a little differently, and sometimes our adversaries, especially when we're in charge of defending an organization, will attack it using methods that we don't really think about. They'll go through an intermediary to attack, right? What's the newest way that a lot of bad guys get into systems? Well, they attack the user, right, through social engineering, or they find some other way to attack. Maybe it's via physical access. Maybe it's pretending to be a pizza guy. There's different ways that people can get in. This is but the tactic for this is not an old tactic. I mean, not a new tactic. Scratch that, reverse it. It's an old tactic made new in cybersecurity. This is a basic tactic. Can you take advantage of something that's defending or blocking and attack that to get to something else? A recent cybersecurity attack from a year ago that I heard that someone was actually employing was they would DDoS the main computer system to force backup systems on an organization to come online. Those backup systems weren't as patched as the standard operating, their normal everyday system. So in essence, this was a skewer attack. They were attacking through a different piece to get the data they were trying to get to. This is how some of these tactics, even though we don't see them, they still apply in a lot of interesting ways. So what's the next tactic we have in chess is the fork, which is attacking more than one piece at once, because you can't be everywhere at once, even though in cybersecurity it always seems like we're pulled in a lot of different directions all the time. This is a tactic often employed in chess when you're splitting the ability for your opponent to react. In this case, we're attacking both the king and the bishop at the same time. White's only going to be able to move the king, and it's going to lose the bishop. There is no way the king can get to protecting the bishop. So we can see this causing a distraction potentially, and confusing an opponent can potentially work when you're talking about a compromise. So another chess tactic is the pin. So making a pin is when you take a piece and it is unable to move because it's protecting another piece. So in this example, we moved our knight as black. White is unable to move the bishop because the rook can then take the king and they'll lose. So the pin is ensuring that the piece is stuck because it's defending a higher piece. What are certain systems that could be potentially pinned or stuck to other systems or attached to other systems? Oftentimes when we talk about attacking a web application, what's connected to a web application normally? There's a database. When you look at these things, well, maybe we can't attack the web application, but we know there's a database behind it, or we can attack the database and then get to the web application. A couple different ways you can look at that. Now, this is probably one of my favorite tactics, which is called remove the defender. And the idea here is, as black, I'm going to attack the knight and remove that, and then check the king. So the pawn has to take the knight, and then the queen will be undefended on e5. So if I'm going to trade a bishop for the knight, then I'm going to get the queen for free. That's 9 points, right? That's going to give me a significant advantage. But before this move, the queen was defended by the knight. So if the queen took the queen, it would be okay because that would be 9 for 9. What we've done is remove the defender. Who can think of in cybersecurity the tactic of removing the defender? Well, maybe disable antivirus. Maybe stop logs from getting to where they need to be, intercepting logs, or stopping the log files from going to the SIM, or poisoning the logs. There's lots of examples we see in cybersecurity where the defender or the defensive mechanisms are removed on a device. All right, so let's look at some live demos because that's much more fun. So I see a lot of people when they first play a chess game, they're often going to be tempted to do something like this. If you've ever done this, you don't need to feel bad about doing this, but in general, you see a lot of people do this, and the reason they do that is because they think by getting this out, because the rook is powerful, it can move a lot of different spaces and cause a lot of havoc here. But normally what ends up happening is if you see this move, black will just move here, and then when you move your rook up, it's just going to take it with the bishop. And now, I'm not a math wizard, but 5 minus 3, I just lost 2 points. And I tend to like to keep my rook. So that's not a good strategy. And in general, when we're talking about chess, we want to control the center. So this does not attack or control the center. So a more ideal position when you start as white is you want to do a move that's going to give you more central control. And often in games, if you look at what a lot of chess professionals, because there are some people that actually make money off this, they will start by moving and doing a move more like this. And the reason for that is because the center of the board, these 4 pieces right here, is generally where you want to have more control of the board. Because here, this piece is in the center. It's now attacking this spot, so it's giving me some central control. The other thing is now these pieces, the bishop and the queen, are now free to move throughout the board. So now I've developed my pieces because now I have more freedom in what I'm able to do. And normally black will return in kind and they'll tend to do this move because they don't want you to be able to do something. Like if they went here, this would be a very beautiful move to do because then you have a very nice opening and control here of the board that can prevent a lot of options for black. So a typical opening you might see, and I see quite often, is something along the lines of this. And the reason the knights come out again is because when they're in this square right here, they can move 8 bases. But more particularly, because they move in an L, the knight attacks this spot and this spot, which is central control, right? So if I'm moving the knight here, that's attacking this pawn. The reason black then moves here is because it's defending that pawn. So you see how white is moving, black is reacting. So when the game first starts, and in general this is true, white actually starts with the advantage. They get to go first until they potentially mess up or do a move that allows black to counterattack. Very similar when we're talking in cybersecurity. When we're cybersecurity professionals, are we white or black? We're definitely black, right? Because we have to react to what the bad guys are doing. And in some cases, we're not really allowed to counterattack either. We can defend, but we can't actually attack back, right? At least they didn't pass that law to hack back, which will be a mess if they do. But as we see here, there's a lot of back and forth reacting. So what would white's next move be? Well, white might try and remove the defender, right? So it might attack here, and then if black maybe wanted to force white to do something, white could go here, black could go here, and what happened? Well, white removed the defender. Now this isn't an actually ideal opening because there's a little trick here, but as you can see, if we look at the pieces, go with that. White's actually now up a pawn. Now, black will get back the pawn because this isn't a great example of remove defender, but that's the basic concept is we remove the defender, and we've also done what's known as doubled up pawns. This reduces maneuverability and is dangerous as the game goes on because now you can't move this pawn at all. The only saving grace to this doubled up pawns is at least you're still attacking the center. But in general, it's going to be very difficult for you to move these pieces because now they're doubled up. Even worse would have been if black were to have done potentially this. Well, actually, that might be better because then what black can do is move this out here, and this is in the center and defended by the pawn. So back to our example here, the reason this isn't ideal for white is because when the queen goes here, what are white's options? Because white could do this to defend the knight, but that doesn't look too good because then black can move here. This isn't so bad because you can do here, but now you're kind of overstretched with your pawn structure and it could cause some issues. If white moves back though, now white loses a pawn in check. So then white has to move here. Black can't move because what has happened to black's queen? So she is pinned to the king. She can't move. So now as black, the only real option, unless you want to do something like just defending it, is really to take the queen. So then you end up with kind of an interesting opening like this. And notice a lot of the pieces are all coming out through the center. When you're playing a chess game, unless you have a good reason to, these 3 pieces over here and these 3 over here, you don't have to move a whole lot unless you have a specific strategy for why you need to move. Almost all your pieces can come out through the 2 center spots. And if you employ this strategy in a lot of the chess games you play, for people who aren't pro chess players or study this stuff, just employing some of these tactics, you'll find you'll win a lot more games. Because in general, you'll have central control, and you'll be able to use this to your advantage to quickly pick up points and win your games and then brag about it. Yes, actually you have. And one of the ideas, we'll go back here and do a different example, is this is typical, and you might hear this called sometimes if anyone here plays chess, there's certain openings. For example, this opening here is known as the Roy Lopez. And they name it because that was the first guy who did it and then took credit for it. So they're named after famous chess players who use these openings. But basically, an opening is a set of really good moves or the best moves in a certain situation. So you hear people in chess talk about, what's your opening strategy? And people are like, well, I don't play with the strategy, I just kind of play. And it's not so much a strategy when you're talking about openings as just a set of probably the best moves from a given situation. And we can know that a little bit because if you notice here on the side, this little computer algorithm here, this is an analysis board from chess.com, will actually go back and tell me how good my moves were based off what the computer said, this would be a better move because 400 moves down, you could have this advantage if you would have made this move over that move. We have that ability now with computing. It'll tell you how good your moves are. So a lot of people who do participate in professional chess tournaments, they use tools like this to analyze. But for our example, this is fine. So this is what a typical opening would look like, and then the game would pretty much proceed from here. After castling, very likely black will do something like this, white will likely go here, and you end up with something like this. So notice that both kings are now castled. There's a lot of back and forth regarding central control. White is likely to do something like either this, or they might go for this, although likely they could also try bringing out the bishop and pin this knight to the queen, potentially forcing black to kind of want to kick him out of there and change the pawn structure a little bit. There's a lot of things that can happen from just this setup, and this is just very common. We'll see. All right, so what can chess teach us about cybersecurity? I've tried to make some parallels as we went through the presentation, but in general, it's about thinking creatively. When we think about adversaries and attackers, that's what they're doing nowadays, is they come up with a lot of creative ways to get into systems. As defenders, we're doing our best to do a better job to cover the basics, right? We've gotten to the point where we even have something as vast as the MITRE attack framework that is detailing each and every dirty tactic that's being used to get into systems and exfiltrate data. But one of the things, because we're defending, right, we're black, we kind of have to be ready for whatever white's going to do, just like in a chess game. So we need to be prepared for what the next thing the bad guys are going to do. And kind of think creatively, are there things in our environments that we work in that they may be able to take advantage of that we haven't really thought about before? And another thing to look at is look for some of those similar tactics via the skewer, fork, and pin. What are things that, if a coordinated or combination attack was done on the organization, maybe you're defending really well on this end, but if these two things lined up, would an adversary be able to do potentially a combination attack against the system and cause issues? And removing the defender. I mean, we think about this, I think about when I'm pen testing systems and I disable AV, I've removed the defender, right? Now my disable live protection, now my malware will run because AV won't detect it. And the best part is then if I disable their AV, I don't have to worry about AV evasion because I just disabled it. And if they aren't tracking when it's enabled or disabled, they wouldn't know. But there's lots of cases where we could potentially remove the defender in an environment, whether it's confusing the logs, erasing logs, a lot of things that could happen from a red team, blue team perspective. So, and that was it. Any questions? What can cybersecurity teach us about chess? Great question. I think As I do a lot with cybersecurity, it helps me to continue to think creatively, especially when I do a lot of pen testing engagements. And that can help me when I'm doing chess games too. Because I think of things just like when I'm like, gee, this is my Nmap scan. What's here that I could attack, or how could I get in? Well, then I have to think back, oh, well, this company, maybe I'll use Crunch and make a word list based off a bunch of keywords off this company's website, and I'll try it against this SSH server and see if I can get in. I have to think kind of what can I do here? And some of that thinking parallels back to chess, and when you're in a weird situation, part of the game is knowing strategy and chess strategy, but the other part of the game is getting into the head of your opponent and knowing what they're going to do. If you can predict what moves they're going to do, you can set up traps and ways to make them fall into different avenues. And I think we see that becoming very popular in cybersecurity. We're setting up a lot more honeypots, a lot of honey traps, and now the new term that I see is now we got honey tokens and honey accounts. So we have fake accounts in company networks because if someone does, an LDAP query on this fake account, we know that this device has been compromised. No one should use that account ever. So we see some creative ways that it's going back and forth in that way. But I think in general, chess is a fun game. I enjoy playing it, and it can definitely help with your creative thinking skills and analytical. Favorite opening? It probably has to be either Roy Lopez or the Four Knights game, which it just provides a very open game with a lot of different tactics and strategies versus a closed game. There's generally two kinds of games, because you can have an open game or a closed game. If you have a closed game, it means kind of all your pawns are locked together. So it might look like a vertical across the board. When you have a closed game, it means your bishops and your queens don't have as much power because from a diagonal perspective, they're locked in. They can't do anything. So the knight becomes incredibly important. My play style, I tend to be a more assertive player, so I tend to like open games where I can do a lot of tactics and set up a lot of traps for my opponent when I'm playing. All right, thank you so much.